Smash that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and like the video. FarmBoy's podcast merch is here. For the first time ever, we've got exclusive, original, one-of-a-kind FarmBoy's podcast t-shirts and sweatshirts. This isn't just another shirt, it's a statement. A badge of honor for those who live the farm life, hustle hard, and keep faith at the center. They are limited, so get it before it's gone. Get yours now and rep the podcast that brings farm grit to the big city. How do I get mine? Head on over to Venmo at FarmBoy's Podcast, where we have your t-shirts and sweatshirts available in multiple colors. Pick your favorite, order, pay all in one place. Limited time, so grab it now.
The bullets are coming over my head because the president was straight in front of me.
Stay tuned to hear Kip's recollection of the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt on our president. This is the FarmBoy's Podcast with former UN Ambassador Kip Tom.
So it's an honor to be on the Farm Boy podcast today. It really is. And as you and I spoke a little bit earlier, I think the more we can do this in agriculture to communicate our messages and what we have to say and how we produce food and how we try to assure that America and the world has a reliable, a dependable, resilient supply of nutritious food, the American farmer does his best or better than anybody. Yeah. So a little bit who I am. My name's Kip, and I'm a farmer from Indiana. I grew up in a little town or near a little town in Leesburg, Indiana. Parents had 5 children. At that time, when I was born, we had 120 acres. It was your typical Midwest farm. That was clear back in the day. And believe it or not, we had tractors then, but back in 1955. And so grew up through, I think, one of the greatest periods of time to grow up in agriculture. Nothing against what it is today, but I look at the transition we made from that 120 acres to where we are today. But then the technology changes, the advances we've seen in agriculture, and how all of a sudden farmers are saying, this is a business and we need to run it that way. So anyway, farmer, Indiana, we're a lot larger than that today. We irrigate a lot. I have 3 children in the business, Kyle, Chris, and Cassie. My sister, Melissa's in the business as well. And my mother, 95 years old, still owns a part of the business, and she knows what's going on each and every day of that farm. So, and then I have 13 grandchildren. Wow. Got 2 that have graduated from Purdue University with ag degrees already. They're working off the farm. That's intentional, just to let them go practice on someone else's money for a little while before they come back, if they choose to come back. So, in terms of what we grow on the farm, we produce seed corn for Bayer. We grow regular commercial corn for some intended end uses, and then soybeans that goes to the Louis Dreyfus plant for biodiesel. So pretty simple operation. We got grain elevator operations as well, but a family business, but a lot of good staff. You can't do it without good people, and we hope to see more growth going forward in the future. But a few years ago, I had the opportunity. I got a call, and the call came in and it said, well, this is President. And I thought, this is someone that somehow mimicked his voice and said, we're going to prank Kip here. And I said, well, I'm sure it is. And he said a little bit more, and I soon figured out this was the president calling. And shortly thereafter, he went in the conversation. He goes, I'd like to ask you if you'd be interested in serving as the U.S. ambassador to the Rome-based food and agriculture agencies with a global footprint. And I thought for a little bit, and I said, you know what? Out of respect for the position, I want to take the weekend and think it through, research it, and know a little more before I say I accept. And Monday I accepted, and it started about a year-long journey of going through the process of Senate confirmation, all the different trainings you have to go through to be an ambassador. But it was probably one of the most enlightening experiences of my life, traveling the world, working with these government agencies around the world, but at the same time dealing with the UN, which, to be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of, just not. But I look at what they do in the World Food Program in particular, in feeding 130 to 150 million people on a daily basis, places where people are maybe living on 200-300 calories a day. And it's just hard to imagine until you get out in places like the Sahel of Africa, or you get into Bangladesh, where you see an internally displaced people camp with nearly 1 million people in it that have been there for 4 generations. There's no job creation. They're just living and eating. And it's sad that that's where our world's at. So how does a lot of this happen? A lot of it occurs because, when people are food insecure, oftentimes they'll migrate 3 times around their own country trying to find food and shelter. It's hard for us to imagine it. I know in the United States or in the developed parts of the world, but it does occur to many around the world, nearly 1 billion people, in fact. But we know once they go 3 times around their own country and they don't find food or shelter, they go outside. And when they go outside of their country, they go into a neighboring country, maybe it's Burkina Faso, Nigeria, you name the country. That's when they're very vulnerable to be part of either illicit drugs and armed movement. They become part of 30 million people are human trafficked a year, or worst case scenario, they get involved in terrorist activities. So this is why we say oftentimes in the role I served in, food security is national security. So that was the lens I had when I was working in Rome. We had other agencies I worked with, the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is very bureaucratic. We're the largest donor, nearly 25% of the budget, but we still only get 1 vote. But it was mainly led by the European bureaucrats who just wanted to promote an elitist food system that does little to feed people around the world. In fact, I would say this oftentimes, the food system that they promote in Europe is it's an indulgence of the rich. It's scientifically indefensible and it's morally indefensible because they promote it across Africa. And that's why we have a lot of the food insecurity that we have today. So I traveled from the farm in Indiana to Rome, Italy. A great place to live at when you're there, but I traveled most of my time in the developing world up through the Middle East, a lot of tough places where we worked, and throughout Africa. So I appreciate the opportunity President Trump gave me. And this last summer, or actually about a year ago right now, I started the group called the Farmers and Ranchers for Trump Coalition, a nationwide campaign where we engaged, empowered, and advocated for people to get involved in the conversation and get involved in a campaign. So I did that for just the better part of till November, till he was elected to office. So in the meantime, I'm back home in Indiana. I'm farming. I'm traveling around a lot, speaking at different events and trying to highlight some of the issues that are important to agriculture. One right now that I think is critically important is to make sure that we get the U.S. on the right path to make sure we are the most, how can I say it, one of the best food providers in the world, food, fiber, and energy. Because there's a lot of challenges to the technologies we've had access to in the past, but we're getting a very limited supply of those into the future. And we know we have some people that want to take some of those tools that we use away from us right now. So I think we need more voices. We need more farmers engaged in a conversation. The people that are inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. are great, and they're doing their jobs. But again, the farmer's voice to me is one of the most important ones. So if there's anything they can do, they need to advocate to their state senators, House members, legislators, and to the U.S. senators and members of the House of Representatives. So I think it's up to us to engage. Yeah, we may be great at growing crops, but we need to get more engaged in working with our members of Congress.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, thank you. Appreciate you hopping on here. I have some questions here that I'm hoping a lot of the viewers are going to want to know the answers to. And then towards the end here, we might jump into maybe some interactions you had at the administration. But we'll start off here with ag in general. So my first question for you is, what do you think is the single most overlooked threat to American farmers right now in 2025?
Yeah, I know I just got off this call and there's a lot of ballot initiatives going on around the country because the MAHA movement, as much as I embrace, let's make America healthy again. I do believe we need to get healthier. I do believe we need to watch the foods we eat. We need to make sure we have a more active lifestyle. But unfortunately, there's some people pointing their fingers at ag and saying, you're the sole problem here. You're the problem why America's obese and we have all these type 2 diabetes problems with our children and we have obesity. It's not us. The consumer has more choices at the grocery store than they've ever had in history. When they go there 12 months out of the year, they can get anything they want at a reasonable price. So it's all about the consumer making the right choice at the grocery store, taking it home, putting it on their dinner table for their family at night. So I think one of the most important things we get involved is to make sure we have access to the tools that we need to produce and feed, fuel, and clothe the world. There's ballot initiatives against CAFO operations, animal feeding operations. We know there's challenges to use a simple tool like glyphosate, Roundup. There's only one company, American company, that produces it all in the United States, and that's Bayer. They have the mine in Idaho. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's where you're from in Idaho, but yep. They produced their phosphorus from there that controls about 2,500 manufacturing jobs. It feeds into a supply chain of over 5,000 retailers across the United States. Yet, because of some of the ballot initiatives, some of the things going on the peripherals of MAHA, it's a tool that buyers, to the point of making the comment, we're months from maybe shutting that production down. Because last year they spent more in outside legal counsel to defend themselves against the lawsuits against them than they did in total gross sales of Roundup itself. So think about that as a farmer. Would you keep putting money into something that's not giving you a return back? In fact, it's costing you. So I think that's an example of some of the challenges we're going to face on the row crop side. I think we're going to face it in animal agriculture. And maybe a little bit later we can get in the conversation about some of our competition around the world, where I just came from last week, which was Brazil.
So that's actually part of my next question. What do you think the real story is behind the big $42.5 billion or whatever it is trade deficit? It seems like it would be front page news. So what do you think the biggest part of this is?
It should be front page news. I think it was in 2012 or 13, we had about a $6 billion trade surplus in agriculture, and it kind of stayed around there till almost 2020. And then we started really falling over the edge in terms of actual exports. The new number that just came out says during the year here sometime, maybe in the second quarter, we're going to be at a $49 billion trade deficit in agriculture alone. And, it's the point the BRIC nations are shoring up their trading alliances. Brazil would much rather trade, or Russia would rather trade with Brazil. China would rather trade with Brazil. They're part of the BRICS, and they go back and forth. So we are now, unfortunately, I'd say this, we're the residual supplier to the world in commodities. So how do we get past that? I think we need to go to more value add opportunities to make sure we can add value here, create U.S. jobs, bring back a lot of this manufacturing, like the crop care products. 70% of our crop care products we use to control weeds, insects, and diseases are produced in India and China, primarily China. We need to bring those back home. I know some of them are really, it's going to be difficult to get them here, but we need to bring as much of that back home as we can, creating good U.S. jobs. So I think that's all part of the discussion when we look at trade and tariffs. And, quite frankly, when I look at that, if you listen to a number of the people involved at USTR over the years, we transitioned nearly $23 trillion of U.S. workers or U.S. people's income out of the country in 20 years to other countries around the world. 23 trillion. That's money, that's net. That's money that is not here to work any longer. It's in China, it's in India, it's in Europe. So we really need to work to make sure we get some fair trade going here really soon.
Do you think the president's administration is creating the boldest ag trade deals in history? Or are we just trying to play defense? Are we going on offense? What do you think President's doing right now?
I think it's bold. I think tariffs are a means to an end for President. He loves to negotiate. We know that yesterday it was about 50 countries said, okay, we're ready to talk. Now today it's already up to 70 countries of the 160 some that we're tariffing against. So I think it begins now. But it seems like it's permanent, right? When we think about trade, we think about these tariffs like, oh, it's going to go on forever and we're going to lose our corn market or soybean market. People will hold us, we'll be a little more suspect of probably us over time. But the reality is we've got to bring this trade back in the United States to where we're selling more than we're buying. And for 25, 30 years, we've been buying a lot more offshore than we've been selling. So it's time to get this rebalanced. It's time to see it be fair. And this will do something to create better paying jobs in the United States and making sure that America still remains a dominant power in the world.
So do you think the end goal with President's tariffs is to ultimately get free trade? If somebody, if Canada says, hey, we're going to tariff you here, we say, okay, well, we're going to tariff you. Wouldn't the logical thing say, hey, you know what, you drop yours, we'll drop ours, and let's just have some free trade?
Yeah, I think you're going to see all the above happen, right? I mean, you're going to probably see some tariffs that could be more permanent. We've had, China has been dumping all kinds of junk, I'll say, in the U.S. for the last 20 some years. As we thought they were a democracy. We thought they were a free enterprise system. And the reality is we took the bait. We thought they were going to be one of us, going to be okay. Well, they're not. I can tell you, dealing with them on the humanitarian side, they're one of the worst countries I ever dealt with in my life, across Africa and the Middle East, the way they just treated people. But when I look at how they conduct trade, it's time to set them in line.
So
again, I'm always conscious of, they're a customer of ours too.
Right.
Everybody wants to say, boy, don't Kip, stop poking on China all the time. But the reality is, they are at a point within about 5-6 years, they're going to be corn self-sufficient. Think about that for a little bit. They've got access to biotech now, right? Because they bought Syngenta. And that's their right. I mean, they buy this company and they're going to be able to pull the genetics out there. They can get GMO crops, and they grow a lot more corn than we do. So you start raising their yields a little bit. The word is that they will be self-sufficient in corn, self-sufficient in beans in about 10 years, and could be net exporters of corn in 10 years. So I'm not as worried about them. I think it's time we push our industry associations, corn growers, soybeans, sunflower, wheat, cotton, rice. Get out there and let's find some new markets, because we need new customers, and Africa is probably one of those places.
Have you seen any trade wins right now that all this has occurred?
No, I can't say that I can mention one right now, because I think it's all such a fluid conversation. It's complex, right? I mean, whether you're talking animal antibiotics that's made in China, or crop chemistries that's there, or car parts, or solar units are built in China partially and then moved to Vietnam, where they're finished up so they can get in it under a lower tariff in the United States. There are so many cross-functioning items taking place at one time. I think it's too early to say, here's going to be the winners and the losers. There will be some losers, but again, this is time we put America first and make sure that we stand up for the American worker and American citizens.
You referenced GMOs and the MAHA movement. Do you think there's a big conflict between GMOs and the MAHA movement? And do you think there's any way, I don't believe there would be any way to feed the world without GMOs. Am I wrong there?
You're absolutely right. You cannot feed the world without them. And in fact, the same people that say we need to go without them are the ones that want to say, for instance, protect the rainforest. Well, you'd have to take down the entire rainforest plus more to replace the yield advantages that we've got over the years with GMO corn as an example, or soybeans. So we've got to have access to these technologies. Listen, they've been here for almost 30 years. They're safe. It's proven. EPA's done rigorous tests on whether it's the crop care side, on the chemistry, or whether it's the genetics in the seed and the grain we produce. It's safe. It's been proven, and we need to trust the EPA, because that's the highest standard in the United States. But again, MAHA seems to be really focused on looking at nutrition, and one of the easiest groups they can probably target is production agriculture. We always refer to ourselves sometimes as you watch a TV show with a safari going on, you see the thousands of zebras running and the lions are chasing them. Unfortunately, we're probably the slowest zebra in defending ourselves, and we got a great story to tell of how we produce food, fiber, and energy. We just need to tell it more often and more frequently and make sure the consumer understands it.
So with the way that things have developed in the U.S. and America, and then you referred to Brazil and China as well, do you think America can still feed the world, or do you think Brazil and China have stolen that crown?
Yeah, I would say, already China produces more than we do. They farm more acres, I'll put it that way. When we look at where the growth markets are probably Brazil. I was there last week. While we've been arguing about regulations, and we've been arguing about MAHA, in the last few years it's been DEI and other things like that, Brazil has had that pedal down to the floor, and they're pushing everything as hard as they can. I've met a couple producers farming over 2 million acres, and yields are comparable to the U.S. They're figuring this out. They got another 40 million hectares, or what is that, 120,000 acres. 40 million hectares to come on. So that's another 110 million hectares to come on production. So if that happens, that's going to displace the United States. Yeah, population's growing. We're going to need to consume more corn, more soybeans, more wheat, more animal protein, hopefully, more dairy. But to get there, we got to do our part. We got to make sure that we have a regulatory environment, we have a business environment in the United States that lets us promote and produce livestock, make sure we can advance biofuels even further from the E10, make sure we we get to E15 and maybe even E20. There's no reason why we can't get there, because we know one thing. Look at the yield advantages and the yields we've seen, how they've increased over the last 5, 10, 20 years. Imagine what they're going to be in another 5, 10, or 20 years. So we need new demand, and biofuels is one of the ways to do that, and increased animal protein production.
You brought up regulation. Do you think that's what's keeping America from total dominance in the global ag markets? Or what do you think it is, and how do we fix it?
Well, I mean, all we have to do is look across the Atlantic Ocean to the east and look at Europe. They're highly regulated, very bureaucratic. Their productivity continues to decline. We know that they have what's called the EU Green Deal Farm to Fork Initiative, where they want to reduce pesticide usage initially by 50%. They don't want to use any GM crops, of course. They want to reduce the use of fertilizer, and they want to be 100% organic over, I think it's like a 20-year period. Now, imagine how you're going to try to feed yourself. So USDA Economic Research Service in 2020 did some work on the Green Deal Farm to Fork Initiative in Europe, and they said if the world embraced this type of farming system, food prices would go up a minimum of 89% around the world. Now, we just went through a 25% increase over the past 4 years here. But imagine if you go and do this around the world. People can't afford to eat now. 1 billion people cannot afford to buy food now. So what are you going to do? That's going to go from 2 billion or 3 billion. And when we got 9 or 10 billion people on the face of the earth, yeah, we've got to have access to innovations.
What do you think is one truth about being a global ag power that would shock the average American?
Yeah, I'll say this, and it's something we learned before we go serve in our respective missions as ambassadors. Every nation's built on 4 pillars of power. Number 1 is the ability to have diplomacy around the world. This is why you have ambassadors in every country to promote the president's agenda for America in that country. It's either to avert or take advantage of an opportunity or divert a crisis. That's number 1. Number 2 is informational services. So we need to make sure we have the best information. We collect information from our different intelligent bodies in the U.S., from government, to understand what's going on around the world so we can make the right decisions. Number 3 is military. You have to have the strongest military and not be afraid to use it. And number 4 is the strongest economy. Now, I contend there's a 5th pillar, not just the 4, there's a 5th pillar. And the 5th pillar is food security. And so that means we have to have a strong agricultural system in the country to make sure, because none of those others are going to exist. If we can't feed ourselves, you're not going to have the military. You're not going to have the economy. You're not going to have the diplomacy, and you're not going to be able to fund government to get the informational resources we need. So this is all about making sure agriculture remains strong. And we have promoted this with the president. We've promoted it throughout the USDA, and Brooke Rollins, the Secretary of Agriculture, she understands it. So again, this is a story that is not often told, but it's how we need to look at the United States of America.
What do you think it's going to take for the USDA and DC insiders to actually understand what it's like to run a family farm today in 2025?
Well, I would say pay attention to what, there will be some press releases here. I can't say what it is right now, but there's some a new group that's going to be formed in Washington, D.C., and it plans on not only working with some of the people inside the Beltway, they've got a lot of institutional knowledge there, but this is a center to listen to farmers. This is a center to understand what's going on in rural America, not just farmers, but in rural America, to make sure we can communicate this in Washington, to make sure the policy that's developed there is right for our country. You know, when you look at this last election, 16 out of the 31 states that Donald Trump won, the number 1 contributor to GDP in those states was agriculture. 16 of the 31, over half. Okay. If you look at it on a county basis, there are right around 444 counties in the country that are pure agriculture, rural agriculture counties. He won 433 of them. So this is a mandate. The president knows that he needs to support agriculture. And this is why I think this will help us with some of the potential risks that we see with the MAHA movement. And this is part of the engagement that I'm involved in today to make sure that our voice is heard in Washington. But again, wait for about another week here, and you'll see a press release come out on, I think, Wednesday maybe, or something like that. But it'll become public, and we plan on engaging farmers and ranchers from across the country and rural America to make sure their voice is heard in Washington, D.C. Loud and clear.
Mr. Ambassador, if you only had right now 5 minutes with the president and he said, whatever you think, whatever your opinion is, let me know in the next 5 minutes and we'll make something happen. What do you think the single biggest ag mistake being made right now?
Well, I would start out first about talking about the positive, because when you look at rural America and you look at agriculture, we are the people that have had the opportunity. I mean, we're the original founders coming into this country when nearly 90% of the people were farmers at that point in time. If you look at us, we've lived the American dream. We're an industry that you're able to work hard, you had grit, you sweated, you put a lot of sweat equity into everything you invested, you took risk, you took your profits, you put them back in the industry, and you raised your family there. That's what I'll say is one of the strongest suits of U.S. agriculture is we've lived the American dream. We need to make sure we keep living the American dream, but I would tell the president our threat is within, and that's whether it's the regulatory bodies in Washington, D.C., whether it's our access to telling a clear message to the consumer. Because the consumer today really looks at agriculture and they don't have the best view of us in general. Now, you put a farmer out there and they typically we're pretty well accepted by the consumer. This is why I'm saying we don't need some figurehead speaking for us that comes from some corporate entity in the United States or wherever. We need the farmer's voice to make sure that farmer's voice is out there telling the message. So I see regulations, taxes are a potential issue. Let's face it, every American farmer wants to, invest in farmland, invest in equipment, grow that business. And I don't know one that doesn't want to hand it on to the next generation and see it continue. That's every farmer's dream. Our family's been here since the late 1600s, and we've always been farmers. And I look at it as part of my obligation to make sure the next generation has the same opportunity I've had and every generation before me. I don't want to be the first one that breaks the chain that we're not farmers. So again, we got to talk about how we transition that land, how we transition that family business, and we got to stop having some of the high estate taxes that we have, where it takes, you got to sell half the family farm to be able to go on into the future. And it's just not right. We've already paid taxes on that money to buy that land, buy that farm, whatever. Those are some of the risks I see. Regulations, taxes, disconnect with the consumer, non-functioning entities in Washington, D.C. that are slow to deliver. Meanwhile, the BRIC nations continue to grow at an exponential rate that trying to surpass us and replace us.
So you've been in a lot of high-level meetings with your position. What is one thing that you can share with us that you've said in a closed-door meeting that maybe you've never said publicly until now?
Oh boy, I probably shouldn't say it then. There's some things that are supposed to be kept quiet, so I won't say any of those. But
okay, there you go. That's fair.
One of the things I would say though is that some of those meetings that we had was we're in trouble. We're in trouble, and unless we start to steer the ship in the right direction, which this ship turns very slow, we're not going to get back to where we need to be. And we need to focus on our core strengths, what made America great, what makes agriculture so great, and everyone needs to be a part of that decision. Every farmer, we're all held responsible.
So what do you think rural communities need to do to survive for the next 5 years?
Well, let's face it, you go to every little town across the United States. I can drive through Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. I can go down to Missouri, Texas, or I can go in the Dakotas, into Wyoming or Idaho, and you see the disappearance of little communities. They've lost their five and dime store. If any of you can remember that far back when you could buy something actually for a nickel or a dime. We've lost a lot of our little grocery stores. Now it's a Dollar General in every little town, or whatever kind of store it might be, or a Walmart within so many miles, or a Costco. You don't have the hardwares anymore. They've been replaced by the Lowe's, and you just wish you could bring those businesses back to the community. So you had that core, the people that were a part of that community. They went to the local hardware to get their supplies. They didn't drive 10, 20 miles down the road to buy a plumbing part to fix a cattle water. I think we got to revitalize rural America. I think it starts with making sure that some of these little schools we have across the country remain open and are vigilant in making sure they deliver the right level of education. I'm glad to see the president doing what he's doing, moving our federal education system back to the states. People that really know, some of them are really the best in understanding how to educate our next generation of leaders. I think we have to have a strong education system in a lot of these rural communities. And I think farmers have some responsibility too. What can they do as stakeholders in that community? Probably the largest businesses there, the largest sector. What can they do to become involved to make sure that community is viable? And I think we need to showcase places like that around the country where that's happened and use them as examples.
So as we recover, the U.S., especially rural communities, from inflation and inflationary pressures, how are global trends like energy prices, cost of goods going up, affecting domestic agricultural producers then at the rural level? You say, we've got these Walmarts, we've got these Lowe's, we've got these things, we don't have the hometown. I mean, as part of these, and obviously it happened before all this inflation happened. How is what's currently happening affecting rural communities so that it's killing them off even faster?
Yeah, so when you look at you go into Walmart and you just go down the aisles and you start picking up items and looking at the back of them where they're manufactured. More likely it's India, but most likely it's China. And I can tell you they're doing it with slave labor in a lot of cases. And I ask myself, is that really what I want to buy, even though it's half price of what the American-made one is? And I'm at the point now today, I'll get by with less, but I'll buy American all the time. So I think of that, and I think back to our rural communities. That's what's happened. Is a lot of these rural communities had little stores that sold nothing but American-made products. They're the ones that created jobs. Maybe the little factory it made, like we got a couple of them around here that made feed trucks. Well, now they're moving away from here and going to other areas and buying cheaper components made in Mexico and other places around the world, and it's hard to compete. So again, I think we need to bring back more manufacturing in the United States, place them throughout the country, and make sure that we have vital communities that are now growing again. We want to see hope. Kids want to see it, and I think we need to set the example for them.
You listed off some things, regulations, deregulation, buying American. Is there anything else the government can do to support farmers through this period or even rural communities?
Well, I think one is taxes, right? I mean, as I said, the estate taxes we have in this country are very burdensome for any farm operation to transition that business to the next generation. And what you often see times is, you see a family of 3, 4, or 5, and there's one son or one daughter that's running a farm, and all of a sudden mom and dad pass, and the kids that live in town say, hey, we want our money, and they end up selling. And next thing you know, that farm is shrink, and they don't have the scale to operate like they need to. Then it's sold, and then they sell off lots for houses or whatever, or mobile home park. And we need to do what we can in taxes to make sure that we keep the farms viable and growing in the United States. Regulations, as I said, whether it's the EPA, whether it's when I look at the EPA and I say, why aren't we E15 already? I think we need to get there sooner or later. I think that revitalizes rural communities. When I think of somebody like Jeff Broyne of Poet Ethanol, that took the risk back in the late 70s, early 80s to build that first on-farm ethanol plant. And then all of a sudden now he's the largest producer of ethanol in the world. He lived the American dream, certainly. But look at the job creation there is that went along with that. And my grandson, in fact, works and buys grain for one of them. So, this is the kind of manufacturing we need to come back, and we need to make sure we add value, whether it's animal proteins, biofuels, or whatever you want to take off your farm.
So we're definitely talking a little more technology here. So how can technology advancements like AI, precision farming, automation help U.S. farmers stay competitive on the world stage and increase productivity?
Yeah, so AI, there's a lot of us that get a little squirmish when we start talking about AI, right? We think that, computers and robots are going to take over the world. Yet, I think used in the right settings, in the right manner, just like that scene behind you that you have behind you right now, it was amazing how that was created all of a sudden, probably within 5 or 10 minutes or less, maybe a minute. there's things we can do with AI. For instance, a farmer may say, hey, identify this weed in my field. It identifies the weed. All of a sudden it says, hey, I have this chemistries available to me, or what do you suggest I use? It comes up with the chemistries you should use. It comes up with a rate you should apply at. Maybe use AI to run some of your spreadsheets to figure farm profitability if you're still using Excel. There's a lot of things AI can do for us in educating us, informing us. But again, it all comes back to the quantity and the quality of the information that's used to develop that for you, the consumer, to use AI to understand what it's saying. So I think it's got great potential. I think AI could be used at the EPA. We know we went from 1,000 people that used to review new chemistries that were coming to the market down to 500 today. And so we have a workforce issue where we don't have enough people to review these products to approve them quick enough to get them to the markets where we can use them on our farms and fields. There are some developing AI tools that they can actually use to help assist. They can run 24 hours, 7 days a week, and coming up with some of the ideas, do some of the testing, and understand how can we get this product approved and moved to the market quicker. So that's just an example. I think there's so many other ways that we haven't even thought about yet that AI is going to make this work for us and be beneficial. But if we don't adopt to it, I think we're going to get left behind.
Yeah. One of the last things I want to talk to you about is not necessarily agriculture, but your time as an ambassador. But what I do want to allow is anything, kind of make this your soapbox. Anything else that you want to say here, or anything that's been on your mind, or you think that's important. I'd like to give you this chance and this time to just say it. If there's anything else you want to say about ag, the U.S. versus international, maybe it's just domestic, but I'd just like to give you a chance to talk about that if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll start out. Number one would be trade tariffs. Everybody, that's all we're talking about right now. We know the stock market has lost a lot of value since last week. It's recovered today quite a bit, over 1,000 points. In fact, I talked to some traders in New York this morning that says we're loading a boat right now. We're getting back in this market. It's coming back. I'm not sure of that, but that's for someone else to figure out. I'm a farmer, not an equities trader, but trade is important. Let's give the president a little time here to conduct his negotiations, make sure that we have fair deals. And at the end of the day, when this is all done, I'm convinced the American farmer will be in a stronger position to trade and sell our products than we were in the past. And so be patient, follow the news, the right kind of news sources, make sure you got good information coming to you. But I'm convinced that the trade issues will get solved. Next, I encourage everybody that's listening to this podcast, whether you've ever contacted your state legislature or a member of Congress in Washington, D.C., start now. Whether it's writing a letter, a handwritten letter, one in an email, or paying a visit to your state house or into Washington, D.C., get involved in the discussion. It's one of the best investments of your time that you can make to make sure that our industry remains viable and strong and your next generation has the same opportunity you have. The other thing I'm going to say is pay attention to what's going on around the world. I think, oftentimes we get so focused in agriculture on what's going on on our own farm, our own section of land, maybe in our county, maybe in our state, maybe in the United States, but pay attention to what's going on around the world because we've become a global economy where we've now commoditized ocean freight and products can move in and around the world very fast. And so there's opportunities, I think, for the U.S. farmers to get involved in that at some point in time. Other than that, I'm just going to say I wish everybody a safe and productive planting season as we draw into spring here. I know a lot of guys in Texas are probably done planting corn and moved on, and it's up into Oklahoma, Kansas, and through the Delta now. But I know here in the Midwest, we're all very anxious. But, we've got about 3 inches of rain in the last week, so we're on the sidelines. But we need to focus on running our farms as business, focus on our family to make sure they're aware of the opportunities there are in this industry. And it's work, but I think we all know that. And again, I think this is just the greatest industry in the world, the greatest occupation, and I'm glad I'm a farmer.
Awesome. Thank you. Kind of shifting gears here. You're hanging out, doing whatever. You get a call from the president. He asked you to be the ambassador. You kind of told that story a little bit already. So I guess, and you can be fairly brief about this if you'd like, but I guess take us through what the steps are of becoming ambassador. There's a Senate confirmation. You said there's training classes. So what's that? I'm sure you have to fly to DC. Or maybe they come to you, I guess, what's the process look like to become an ambassador?
Yeah, so first thing I did was probably got nearly 100 letters of recommendations of people saying why they thought I'd be good for the role. That's number one. So you need to have a network to go to support you, to the member of Congress that may be, and me, for instance, I was going in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So it goes off to the chair there. They review it. The president gets a view of it. White House personnel gets to view it. I interviewed with everybody. I met with every senator or his key staff members on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I met with the President's Personnel Office in the West Wing in Washington, D.C. I went through a period where I had to have FBI background investigations on me. And I had an initial list, I think, of 150 people that they should go talk to. That ended up being nearly 350 or 400 people that they end up talking to one-on-one of what do you know about Kip? And what can you tell us? And thank goodness none of them were high school friends, because they could probably come up with some pretty good stories that maybe I didn't want out there. But no, seriously, they interviewed a lot of people. They go through that process, and they give you a green light or a red light. So I obviously had a green light. After meeting with the senators, we got on the schedule to get a hearing finally. It took a lot of time. Went through the process of people asking all kinds of questions in that hearing about where your values are at. What's your thoughts on climate? What are your thoughts on, in developing world and feeding people? They just want to know if you have the relevance to go and serve and represent the United States in this capacity. Then from there, they submit to you online questions, and then you have to respond to them. And then hopefully you get a full Senate vote. And I went in by myself. Sometimes it's a package. It could be 20, 30 ambassadors or different people that needed confirmation. My vote was actually on myself in front of the U.S. Senate, and it was on a Friday afternoon, about 5:30. They got the vote done, and I got confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Went through some training with the CIA, went through some training with the Department of State for about a month and a half, 2 months. And then I had to, through all this, you have to submit all your financial information to the government for them to review. Then they tell you if you have any conflicts of interest. And this is, you negotiate a little bit, but if you do have conflicts, you have to dispose of those assets. So let's say you got $1 million in some kind of stock or some kind of asset that's a conflict for the role you're going to be serving in. You've got to sell it. Maybe you can exchange it and put it in something else so it's not subject to any of your actions as serving as an ambassador. But nonetheless, if you can't find something like that, you're going to pay the capital gains taxes. You're going to pay taxes on the income. So it can be very expensive to go and serve. And you just need to be aware of before you go of what can I do to make sure I meet the ethics guidelines, which I'm glad we have because it keeps them in the straight, hopefully. But, on a monthly basis, I had any stock trading I had going on, I had to report to the government. That has to be done. If you miss it by a day or two, they're sending you a warning. So those are some of the things went on. And then next thing I knew, I got a departure date for Rome, Italy. Got on a plane and flew to Italy and went to work, working with 6 different UN international organizations. They're focused on food security, some on development law, some on private law, and then those are the main focuses that we had, and a bank as well.
So it kind of seems like a petty question, so I apologize. But do they have you fly commercial, or are you on like a government plane?
Commercial.
Commercial, okay.
Yeah, and so they fly you over first class or business when you get over there. When you go home, it's on your own. So maybe you're flying coach or whatever. But when I traveled around for the government in places in Africa, I mean, it could have been a day and a half of travel, but because none of the flights were over a certain length of time, I would only book coach. And I did. That's all I did is I took coach most of the time when I went into Africa. And coach is much different in Africa than it is in the United States. So you fly into Addis Ababa, places like that, and on into Zambia or Zimbabwe. And it's a little different air travel than what we're used to. We're spoiled here. But yeah, coach.
Okay. Did you have a staff that traveled with you?
So when I first got there hadn't been an ambassador in that role for about, I think it was 18 months maybe. And so we had some travel budget build up. And I said, you know what? I'm going to ask for anybody that wants to go on our first trip into South Sudan, which is it's a country that's really in fact, they're getting ready to break out into a civil war again. But we went there, and I said, any one of you that want to go with me, we're going to use up some of that travel budget because it's there. It wasn't that much, but we took, I think, 4 people with us on that trip. And every other time I always took 1 or 2 people with me because I wanted them to not be somebody just sat in an embassy and didn't come in contact with the impact we had around the world. I wanted them to see it firsthand. And when you go into places like I did in South Sudan, you fly into Juba, the capital, by commercial airline. You hop on a World Food Program plane, a prop plane. You fly into a dirt runway somewhere. Then you hop on a helicopter and you fly for another 2 hours to get to these camps where these people are at. And you see the worst of the worst that our world is living in. People, like I said, living on hundreds of calories a day, some on the edge of starvation. When you hold a 4-year-old child in one hand like this, it's a bad situation. Or you see the nearly 40% of the kids are childhood stunted because they don't have a proper diet when they're either in their mother's womb or once they're born the first 2-3 years. So you have to travel to see this. And I just wish, that's one thing I try to do when I go out and speak, is try to bring that experience to people so they understand how good we got it. The U.S. is only 4.5% of the world's population, and we don't choose who we're born to or where we're born. So we're pretty lucky to be here, but they need to understand that the rest of the world isn't like us, and pretty dire situation in many places.
What do you think the country that struggles the most that you were allowed to visit that you went to? Which country is that?
Yeah, there's a lot that fall into that bucket.
Okay.
It'd be Somalia, it'd be Yemen, it'd be Sudan. I was there 2 years ago, took a group of private industry folks from machinery manufacturers, seed producers, crop chemistry producers, irrigation companies to Sudan, because we said the UN can't get this done. Maybe it's time for the private sector to come in, the people that have the money, the intellectual property, the know-how, that can really make sure food security becomes whole in that nation. So we took a trip into Sudan. We met with the president, Burhan. We met with Hamiti. A week after he left, they broke out into a civil war. But what we learned when we were there is this is one of the richest places for resources in the world. They got plenty of water from the Nile River. They got this rich, loamy soil that can all be irrigated. I think in one area there's nearly 2.5 million acres that right next to the capital that they could have used. But then they break into a civil war and everything breaks down. The people who were investing there lost everything all of a sudden. Sudan's in that bucket. South Sudan's in that bucket. Burkina Faso is fastly getting there. But when I look at a country that could be in trouble, I look at probably Nigeria. Now, I'm talking all about these countries that are in the Sahel. It's where the desert meets the savannas and the plains, the green area where everything grows. Nigeria, I think in about 10, 15 years, is going to be the 3rd largest country in the world. Now, look up Nigeria on a map and just look how big it is. It's not that big, but it's going to be the 3rd most populous country in the world. So it's going to be China, India, and Nigeria. And they can't feed themselves today. They don't have the supply chains. And so how do they get there? So a lot of investments are going to have to be made, or we're going to have food security maxed out, and we're going to have a lot of growth in terrorism and, as I said, human trafficking, illicit drugs and arm movement. In terms of probably one of the worst countries, I'd say Yemen. With the Houthi rebels, it's probably one of the worst. It's the longest lasting, largest area that the U.S. has been involved, or the World Food Program has been involved in delivering food security at the rate of about $150 million a month. And nearly 40% of that is stolen before it gets to the intended recipient. So the Houthis would steal it, take and either consume it themselves or use it and sell it, or sell it and buy arms and munitions. So we ask ourselves oftentimes, do we cut aid off and stop the Houthis from their ability to access funds, or the Iranians who use them as their proxy to stir things up in the Gaza and everywhere? Those are tough choices, because you're talking about millions of people dying at that point in time. Yeah. Another tough spot is Gaza. We actually cut off some funding into the Gaza Strip because we found out that it was going in and actually funding organizations that are supposed to be development organizations for agriculture to help produce food and food security and create resilience and capacity. And I said, let's start looking at who controls these organizations. Well, we found out most oftentimes they were controlled by the Al-Qaeda. And once we found that out, we said we had to pull pull away, stop that funding, because we knew that funding was probably going to fund what they did on October 7th, 2023, what they did to the Israelis. So there's a lot of tough spots in the world. But again, we don't choose where we're born or who we're born to. We're very fortunate.
To end this kind of on a lighter note, that's pretty heavy stuff. Do you have any funny stories or maybe even something interesting that you can share between you and the president? I'm assuming you had at least a couple conversations. Any funny stories or anything?
Well, I'm not saying it's a funny story, but probably the best story that I have with the president was I was with him in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Oh.
And, met up with him and shook his hand, talked to him for a few moments in the back room behind the stage, and before he went on stage. And then I was taken back out to my seat, and I was right at the corner where the red carpet made a 90-degree turn where he went up to the podium. And I shook his hand, talked to him, and he came out there, and we actually did a high five. And as he was walking up the stage, and I saw all that happen. Not a funny story, but it's a good story, because here's how it ended. The president lived, but what I noticed is you heard the people chanting afterwards, USA, USA. But then once the president was escorted off stage, I saw Americans come together. I saw Americans that, there was one guy behind me, Corey, the fireman that was shot, that died. He was like 6 rows behind me. I saw people helping his wife and helping his children cope with that. I saw elderly people that were on the ground that were crying and couldn't get up. Total strangers, helping them get up and walking them to their car. I saw the best that America had to offer that afternoon in Butler, Pennsylvania, because people were together. Most of them were there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he didn't get on stage till 6 p.m. It was 90 degrees and the humidity was high. All they had was water to drink and any food that they might have brought in. So I saw a great part of America there. It's not a funny story, but it's a story I recall the best, and it makes me proud to be American, knowing what I know and what I saw that afternoon.
Wow. Yeah, that is a great story. Gosh. Wow, that's crazy. That must have been very surreal.
It was. I knew right away that it was gunfire because, the bullets are coming over my head because the president was straight in front of me and evidently dropped his rifle a little bit and got the guy behind me. But I saw bullets hitting, or you could tell the bullets were hitting something on a backboard across the stage. At the same time, one of the bullets hit a hydraulic line on a telehandler that was holding some speakers up in the air. Mm-hmm. And I seen it come down and oil was spraying out. So I knew something was going on, but no, it was clear. You heard one caliber of gun going off first, and then a totally different caliber. That's when the Secret Service got involved, obviously, and exterminated the threat. But it was quite an afternoon, but one I'll never forget. But again, I tried to look at the bright side of it, and President lived, and I saw Americans at their best.